Hello, and welcome to another edition of Chambers Expert Focus. Today we'll be discussing intragroup services, a vital component of the broader transfer pricing framework. Joining us to help navigate this topic, we have Priya Bhutani. Priya is an executive director at Grant Thornton Bharat LLP and an expert in transfer pricing and related party transaction governance. Welcome, Priya.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be a part of this conversation, and I'm really looking forward to our interaction today.
Wonderful. While intragroup services, or IGS, are essential for multinational enterprises, they often spark significant scrutiny and litigation, and we'll be exploring how this contentious area has evolved in the light of growing international economic collaboration and in a world where the ease of doing business is a key commercial concern. We will also discuss how tax authorities and multinationals have matured over time to tackle these issues effectively, and we'll be discovering the gaps that are yet to be bridged to foster a more integrated and effective ways to disclose and govern IGS. So, Priya, to start with some basics, can you briefly explain why IGS are so integral and important for multinationals and their relevance in the current transfer pricing landscape?
Sure. So I think firstly, let's comprehend that IGS has been a very common phenomena in any M&E setup and related party arrangements. They've become even more integral in the new normal of cohesive economies, leveraging cross-functional efficiencies and seamless global integration. Um, so IGS typically has a lot of benefits, and thereby it positions as a core driver of economic growth and efficiency. Some of the benefits are like cost efficiency and resource optimization, where centralized service centers help larger groups reduce cost by leveraging on a common resource pool and thereby eliminating any duplication functions across different group entities. Uh, it helps in having uniform quality and policies whereby standardized processes across the group ensure consistency in quality, compliance, and operational alignment. Also, strategic focus and specialization gets enhanced, where such centralized services are housed in certain specific entities. The operating entities or the major growth focused entities can focus on larger growth initiatives and strategic growth. So that's why they are relevant and they're integral for M&E setup. Let's understand how are we, with respect to IGS in terms of data. So data from multiple sources indicate that around 35% of intercompany transactions in the M&E setup are service-based. The service sector today constitutes about 75% of GDP in high-income economies. And if I talk specifically about India, then India's service sector contributes about 50% of India's GDP, which approximately works about to 339 billion USD. With specifically GCCs growing in, India's share in digitally delivering services has increased from 4.4% in 2019 to about 6% in 2023. Therefore, it reinforces the fact that, centralized service in a place like India is the next future.
So some serious statistics there, big numbers. And one of the key issues in IGS, particularly from a transfer pricing point of view, is chargeability. As a transfer pricing specialist, what are the criteria and guidelines that are recommended to differentiate chargeable activities from non-chargeable activities?
Sure. So I think we can start with the layman definition, and then we'll go on to analyze how OECD kind of recommends and recommends differentiating between chargeability or non-chargeability of our intra-group service. Chargeable services can be broadly defined as those that render a tangible benefit to the recipient entity and add some sort of economic or commercial value to enhance its commercial position, in terms of benefit, tangible, or adding value commercially. These are the key words that specifically attract charge for a service received. Whereas on the other hand, non-chargeable services can be defined as those which provide expediency or convenience and for which any independent third party would not have paid separately. Um, to quote some examples for chargeable services could be centralized IT support, human resource management, centralized R&D facilities, AI-based data analytics, or strategic planning. The key feature to decide whether a service is chargeable is that it must satisfy a benefit test. And that's something it has been a common principle or a testing parameter across countries. OECD recommends that there are two underlying conditions that need to be satisfied together to substantiate chargeability for a particular service received. Firstly, the recipient entity gains or anticipates an economic benefit from the services received, and any independent enterprise would be willing to pay for similar service in an uncontrolled scenario. Now, when we come to non-chargeable category, those services could be like a shareholder activity where tasks are performed for the benefit of the parent entity. It could be such as preparing consolidated financial statements, cost of activities related to judicial structure of the parent company itself, such as parent companies, shareholder meetings, etc. Incidental benefits like indirect advantages, something which is not directly attributable to a group entity, could be like, to give an example, enhanced credit rating due to a group association, and not necessarily which can be directly attributed to the standalone performance of the group entity. Lastly, duplication services that are already performed locally, such as, if there is an IT support, HR support that's already performed in-house, but still a group entity ends up paying to another group entity for similar services, then those should be non-chargeable, will be considered non-chargeable. One thing that I'd like to critically, recommend is that we need to continuously monitor the intrinsic nature of such IGS. What a service received today may not be chargeable, but tomorrow, as we go along with changing business dynamics, such services could become chargeable. So what's recommended is compliance with transfer pricing regulations and regular monitoring of such intrinsic nature of services.
Got it. Thank you. And another key consideration for IGS, as well as chargeability or non-chargeability, is the value add. And I was wondering if you could explain to our viewers how one can rely on the OECD guidelines to categorize services as either low value adding or high value services in the context of transfer pricing. And what do you really think are the key differentiators that determine characterization along the value curve of IGS?
So for transfer pricing purposes, even before we understand the differences between these two buckets, what's also important to comprehend is that clear distinction of services is crucial, as a varying intensity and criticality of such services have a direct and binding impact on the transfer pricing policy per se and the resultant compliance requirements. Businesses, therefore, are recommended to categorize services appropriately to align and ensure appropriate transfer pricing disclosures are made. To begin with, low value adding services are typically routine, are in the nature of support services that do not involve any unique intangibles or assumption of significant risk. On the other hand, high value adding services are strategic services that involve more often than not proprietary knowledge, high stake decision making, and risk assumption. These value adding services can also directly contribute to competitive advantage and revenue generation for the service recipient. For the low value adding services, OECD recommends a simplified approach as per BEPS Action 10, typically with a modest cost plus markup capped at 5%. And of course, the transactional net margin method is recommended to be the most preferred method. However, for high value added services, remuneration are typically linked to their strategic importance in the overall value chain of the business. A few of the remuneration methodology could be cost plus arrangement, but with a higher markup basis arm's length benchmarking analysis. In some cases, it could also be a certain percentage of sales often applicable where the services directly influence profitability of the recipient, and that can be tangibly proven. In some peculiar cases where there is involvement of intangibles, profit split method can also be applied, where multiple group entities come together for value creation and have a profit sharing models may be employed to ensure fair allocation.
It's clear that there are a number of complicated questions that affect the value of intergroup services. So it's also unsurprising, I suppose, that litigation often arises in the context of IGS. What makes IGS so contentious in transfer pricing audits, and what do tax officers typically focus on during assessments?
I think it's a very valid question, specifically in the Indian arena where transfer pricing scrutiny still forms a major part of any taxpayer's intra-group arrangements, and they're often scrutinized specifically for IGS. Now, inherently, the benefits that come out of IGS have been tangibly immeasurable, and the benefits are often imperceptible, making them susceptible to a lot of scrutiny. Common points of contention have largely been around benefit test challenges, valuation issues, documentation gap, where taxpayers are unable to provide tangible proof of services required, rendered, and actually received, especially for some on-call advisory or some things that come informally over emails. Also, disputes have been around classification, like classification of chargeable versus non-chargeable category, classification between a shareholder service or a service that comes up only because they are incidental benefits. Over time, tax officers have focused specifically on substantiation of need. Typically, questions like, is the service necessary at all? Or could it have been availed from a third party rather than your own related party? Are there adequate evidence of benefits maintained? Like, can the taxpayer prove it derived tangible benefits, whether it had impact on your revenue or sales, or whether there were considerable cost efficiency achieved since the time the services were availed? How the cost allocation is made. Was the cost sharing mechanism fair, rational, and logical? Were there any duplication of services, like whether these services were already performed locally or similar services were availed from any third-party vendor, etc. And of course, finally, the pricing per se, whether the markup is appropriate and is at arm's length. Now, litigation issues have also been around whether IGS should be evaluated on a standalone basis or it can be aggregated with the primary business and can be, tested at a neck level. Of course, demonstrating economic and commercial benefits, showing the actual benefits gained has been like a never-ending struggle. More often than not, there has been like a blanket nil benchmarking that the tax officers come up with, where they determine that the price paid for the services received has to be nil. And therefore, there's not much that the taxpayer is able to do in terms of presenting the facts. Or in some cases, the allowance is only limited to whatever can be quantified. So there are a lot of pain points that litigation has, shown the taxpayers over time. But as we go along, what's interesting to also note that there are also dispute avoidance mechanism, which to a large extent have favorably addressed or, given comfort to the taxpayers, specifically on the pain points that we just discussed.
Fantastic. Thank you. Tour de force there, a lot to consider. And if we could move on to some specific examples of the ways different tax authorities around the world treat IGS, could you provide a comparison of how what are sometimes known as matured or more developed economies address the complexities of IGS in contrast with the Indian transfer pricing landscape?
Sure. So like you said that, routine scrutiny still continues and has been continuing over the years. But encouraging trends show that, MNEs have now adopted for dispute avoidance mechanism, such as the safe harbors, advanced pricing agreements, or MAPs, a mutual agreement procedure, to achieve certainty for specifically the intra-group service arrangements. Few stats coming here from India, where the annual report published by the APA authorities indicate that 64% of the unilateral APAs that got signed in financial year 23-24 were from the service sector and included services, intra-group service arrangements. And 50% of the total bilateral APAs signed were in this domain. So these are very encouraging numbers, which show that, there is a shift towards opting for dispute avoidance mechanism where favorable results have been achieved. The way APA or MAP negotiations around intragroup services take place are also more favorable because there is an opportunity for the taxpayer to present a detailed functional analysis with respect to documentary evidence, requirement of services, benefit, etc. And there is a fair amount of opportunity to interact in person with these authorities through physical site visits or presenting fact-finding submission, etc., which erstwhile was not a possibility for taxpayers during the routine litigation route. In addition, the way such dispute avoidance mechanism through APAs take place is not just about a comparability fight or simply moderating the markup of the services or determining a nil value for the transaction. It is done more logically and rationally, not just by determining arm's length profitability for the Indian taxpayer, but also comparing what taxable profitability is left after paying for these services. To cite an example, assuming that an Indian taxpayer who's applied for an APA earns a net profitability of 8%, and for its business efficiency and operation, it relies on one of its group entities and avails a centralized IT support service and pays a 5% markup for such services. When you go before the APA authorities, what they typically look for is not just moderating or looking at the markup paid on such intragroup services, but also what similar functionally comparable taxpayer earns in terms of the net profitability in India. So in the same example, assuming that the market benchmarks say that, such Indian taxpayers earn a 10% profitability, then the approach that is followed to conclude the APA is that the 5% markup that you pay for the services availed is moderated so much so that a 10% profitability is retained at the net level of the applicant. So such out-of-the-box and more rational approaches make these mechanisms like APA more favorable. When we talk about safe harbors, I think there are a lot of factors that contrast between how they are scoped out in India and how they are scoped out in mature economies like US, UK, Australia, etc. Like, for example, if we talk about the scope of safe harbor rules per se, today in India, the safe harbor rules apply only to the receipt of low value adding services and not to the other end of, the transaction where India is rendering such services. Whereas in mature economies, safe harbors encompass both the provision and receipt of low value adding services, therefore offering a broader applicability. India also has a threshold cap wherein a 5% markup on transactions up to 1.2 million USD, including the markup, is only eligible to be opted for safe harbor. Whereas in other countries, they are aligned with OECD, which recommend a blanket 5% for low value adding services without any specified transaction value cap. India still has not fully adopted to OECD's simplified approach in the sense that the obligation to file your annual TP compliance and maintaining documentation still prevails even if you opt for safe harbors, whereas other countries are largely and closely aligned to OECD, implementing simplified approach to reduce compliance burdens as well. What's also interesting to know is that we in India got our annual budget recently from the finance minister, and it has been reiterated that litigation burden on Indian taxpayers will be reduced. So it will be interesting to know how updated safe harbor rules for intra-group services would be laid down for the ongoing financial year and beyond.
Interesting. Another key question is how modern ways of working and doing business affect IGS. In your view, has the relevance of IGS evolved in the post-COVID-19 era, especially given the rise of remote working and hybrid work setups?
I think post-COVID, there's been a shift to hybrid and remote work, as we all know, and that has reshaped the relevance of IGS, driving greater centralization, digitization, and cost allocation challenges. Rise of GCCs, wherein M&Es are increasingly relying on GCCs for IT support, business process management, engineering design, and even R&D services. We need to look at how IGS has expanded not only in scope but also in relevance very critically. In India today, I think India hosts about 1,600 plus GCCs and contributes to 46 billion of revenue and employs about 1.66 million of professionals. And this is only today's stats with a very clear vision of future expansion, wherein GCCs are expected to grow to about 1,900 and contribute about $60 billion by 2025. Now, shared services not only now manage the typical offshore functions, but are now managing global functions for efficiency and cost control as well. Gone are the days where, it was only limited to supportive services like HR and admin. I think they have grown to take up services which are high and critical for overall business functions, which include digital transformation, data analytics, cloud engineering, centralized marketing, etc. With the new normal of hybrid model and new work dynamics and the enhanced scope that we just discussed of IGS, what is recommended is to keep a robust documentation and updated transfer pricing policies in place. Also evaluate for such expanded and newer categories that fall into the IGS bucket, how dispute avoidance mechanism can be suitably availed and relied on.
Thank you. And if we continue to explore how modern developments are shaping IGS taxation, with digital transformation reshaping so many business processes, how do you envision technology playing a role in the governance of intragroup services?
Absolutely. I think that is going to be the next big thing. And one day, probably when we speak 5 years down the line, it'll be the normal by that time. Digital transformation is reshaping governance around IGS by enhancing compliance, efficiency, and adaptability through technologically enabled solution like what we call as operational transfer pricing. Operational transfer pricing is a practical implementation and automation for transfer pricing policies, and it helps you with the real-time assurance of accuracy, consistency, and compliance. Operational transfer pricing automates TP policies and integrates it with the ERP systems and sets up guardrails for any deviations. There are tools, which are driven by AI that help organization quickly adapt to changing regulatory landscapes, ensure that compliances remain up to date. Scalable technology solutions can accommodate new requirements and adapt to varying compliance needs across different regions or economies or sectors and even jurisdictions. There are live tracking and AI-enabled automated dashboards that, stakeholders can monitor and trigger proactive interventions. The big data solutions enables informed decision makings and risk mitigation by stakeholders. There are a lot of efficient data management and security enabled tools that ensure that critical data is quickly retrieved, secured, and centrally stored for different group companies to access with ease. So yeah, I think technology is the future. Sorry.
Clearly, a rapidly developing landscape there. And now, quickly, just before we wrap up, could you share a couple of takeaways for our viewers as key considerations when addressing IGS?
Absolutely. I think the future outlook for IGS is promising, with technology playing a very crucial role in enhancing compliance and governing policies around IGS. As organizations continue to globalize and face more complex regulatory environments, the need for IGS management in terms of policy and governance is now more than it has been ever before. So, my top 5 mantras for governance around IGS would be: one, comprehensive planning. Establish clear policies and robust documentation to ensure consistency and compliance. Two, set up internal control. Implement strong governance frameworks, allocation key, benchmarking to reflect actual benefits, record policies, and on real-time basis identify any gaps. Continuous monitoring, regularly assess and TP policies using real-time tracking and benchmarking studies that help you continuously monitor would be my third mantra. Fourth, dispute avoidance mechanism for tax certainty. Like litigation has been an ever pain point for the taxpayers. Um, Economies are moving towards enhancing the avoidance mechanism. So it's important for companies to evaluate how APAs and maps and safe harbors can be opted to minimize tax disputes and ensure certainty. Lastly, proactive compliance. I think we can leverage largely on technology and stay updated on regulations to mitigate risk of non-compliance and enhance governance around IGS. So yeah, those would be it.
Comprehensive advice there. Priya, thank you so much. This has been a very insightful half hour on intragroup services. Fascinating stuff. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was my pleasure.